Okay, welcome to another installment of going through John's Gospel, verse by verse. And we're in chapter 4. We just finished up the big chapter 3 with Nicodemus and For God So Loved the World. And now chapter 4 is actually kind of the end of the thought of chapter 3. At least the first 3 verses are kind of cleanup. If they would have numbered it properly, they probably would have started chapter 4 at verse 4 instead of what John did. But so we'll just do this little bit of cleanup, and then we'll look at some other foundational pieces before we jump into the woman at the well. So verse 1 of chapter 4 is, the Pharisees heard that Jesus was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John. So now this little rivalry that we heard about in chapter 3, and John's disciples and Jesus' disciples talking about it, now the Pharisees hear about it, and they've been watching John, they've been testing John, and now this is a warning to the Pharisees that, someone is getting to be bigger than John. You got to start watching out for him. And then verse 2, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. And here, many Bible scholars think that this is an insertion. And it makes sense with the chapter, the way that this is at the end of the, not even at the end of the chapter, it's in a new chapter. But it's almost like there was an editor along the way after John wrote it who wanted to, their theological position was that Jesus didn't baptize, because it says in verse 22 of chapter 3 that Jesus and his disciples went into the Judean countryside where he spent time with them and baptized. So it really sounds there like Jesus was baptizing. So, if John wanted to correct that mistake, he would have maybe said it in chapter 3. But this is almost like a correction after the fact. So a lot of scholars think that's what's happening. That there's, John writes the gospel, but then quickly over time there's some editing or other people are helping put it together as a whole book. And then in verse 3, or verse 2, and actually the sentence itself doesn't have very good sentence structure in the Greek or the English, because it's kind of a little bit of a run-on thought. And it's a little bit unlike the rest of John here, so that's another reason. Verse 3, when the Lord learned of this, he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. So here Jesus is like he did when he cleansed the temple. He kind of, when some threats come up, Jesus kind of fades into the countryside. He fades back into Galilee. So this is part of Jesus' ministry, especially in John, kind of making a point and then taking a break. And so we're told that he does that here. And verse 4, now he had to go through Samaria. And the way this is posed, that he had to, usually when we hear it, it makes us think about, what's the best route geographically or physically to get there. But here, the language, my commentary was saying that the language is really pointing to the fact that this is part of God's plan, that's why he and the disciples have to go this way, the way that it's worded. We see that in other places in John. In verse 5, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. So this is where we had our Bible study on Monday, and this is where we took a lot of time to kind of look at some of the history and the foundational pieces. So we want to do that now, too, before we jump into the actual story of the woman at the well. So I just want to grab a map here. I don't know if you can see this very well, but this is Israel. Here's the Dead Sea down here and Galilee up here. The distance between these two is like 4 hours by car, maybe 5 hours by car if you drive straight on a highway. It's like from here to Duluth pretty much. But Jerusalem down here was kind of the center of everything, right? So Jerusalem is in what they call Judah for a long time when the kingdom was split. the nation of Israel was whole for just David and Solomon. Saul, David, and Solomon. And then it split into two for the rest of their history. Israel was up here and Judah was down here. And what happened in 721 was the empire of Assyria, which is up near where Syria is now, and all of Babylon in that area. The big Assyrian empire came and basically destroyed the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom. And they took all the people and they displaced them all over the rest of their empire, and they lost their identity as a people. And these are called the 10 tribes because there was 10 tribes up in this area, and just 2, or actually 3 down here, depending how you look at it. But the 10 tribes were lost. Those are called the lost tribes of Israel, 10 lost tribes. If you're a Mormon, the Book of Mormon picks all that up, but we're not going to talk about that. Anyway, so this people that came in here in this area, what this sort of empty land was peopled with other peoples from the Assyrian Empire. They brought in them as immigrants. And these people over hundreds of years kind of developed a religion that was a lot like the Jewish religion, although they worshipped in a place called Mount Gerizim. Is it on here? Yeah, here's Sychar and Mount Gerizim, kind of right in between Galilee and Jerusalem. And they set up their own temple. And so the Samaritans, the people of Samaria, worshipped quite a bit like the Jewish people, but they weren't Jews. They had different culture, a little different language, developed over time. They worshipped in a temple on Mount Gerizim. And the Jews didn't like them, especially because of their temple, right? If you were going to follow the true God, you had to worship in Jerusalem, not anywhere else. And so the Samaritans built a temple in Mount Gerizim in 200 BC. And the Jews hated it, and so they actually sent an army in 128 BC and destroyed it. So it wasn't too much longer, another 120 years before Jesus is born and in his ministry. So that's not very long from the time that the Jewish people destroy the Samaritans' temple till they start to rebuild it. So, and when the Samaritan woman talks about it, she talks about the temple on Mount Gerizim that the Samaritans use, or the temple in Jerusalem that the Jews use. So she brings that up. But there was a lot of anger and enmity over this because they became enemies over this temple dispute. And so that shows up in chapter 4. That's a big part of it. And actually, Galilee, one of the other things about Galilee was Galilee had Jewish people that lived around Galilee, and then the Samaritans were kind of in between. Because when the Jews came back from Babylon, they populated this area, and they came up here and they populated areas around the Sea of Galilee. But this was kind of the backwater, kind of country bumpkins lived here. And the elites, all the smart people, however they thought of themselves, the cosmopolitan ones lived down here in Jerusalem in that area. So Jesus was from Galilee, right? That's why the big city slickers didn't always like him, the Pharisees. What good can come out of that area? They, like Nicodemus said. So that's a little bit of setup. Another couple other pieces is what happens when Jesus gets to the well. So, and maybe I need to pick this up on another video, another set of video. There's a lot of foundational work we need to do here before we can actually read the story, because there's a lot that goes into this story. So kind of covered the Samaritan piece, where the people came from, the Mount Gerizim temple, the difference between the two, the hostility between the Jews and the Samaritans. So we'll just stop there and pick up kind of set it up for this conversation between Jesus and this woman at the well. All right, thanks.